Mein Deutsch ist sehr schlecht, so ich will auf English sprechen. Is that good?
You're welcome to do it like that.
Thank you. My first slide is actually an apology, because I note that we had a game this week, but I would like to say that I'm a rugby man through and through, and so I will not touch on football. Okay, I expect no questions on football. And having said that and got that out of the way, I will move on. My second point is that I went looking at the focus of the Heinz Nixdorf Institute, and I put there what I think is a key statement by yourselves. And to reflect on that, I want to give those of you who are listening, and especially the young researchers and PhD students, 3 questions which will frame what I'm going to say and how you might be thinking about it as I talk. Firstly, what would you do if you were me? If you were faced with the same decisions that I was faced with and you had to react accordingly, what would you do? Secondly, how can you prepare yourself for that position? And thirdly, how can we as a society better protect those who speak up? I think it's common knowledge at the moment that whistleblowers are not well looked after. They're not well respected. They are penalized, reprisals are taken against them, no matter what segment of society you're in or what sector you're working in. And therefore, what can we do as a society to better protect? Let me just start by giving you a little bit of a background. You might have read some of the biographical details that were passed to you. Essentially, I have been an army officer for 24 years. I'm actually a retired colonel. I was a paratrooper. I spent 2 years in counterterrorism, and I spent a number of different roles in Arctic warfare, in armored warfare, and I lectured at Staff College, the British Staff College, and ended up in Bosnia, commanding a regiment when we went in to do peacekeeping operations, and then in the Ministry of Defence as a project manager of very large projects. And it was therefore interesting for me to be able to take up a job in Saudi Arabia to effectively modernize all the communications for the National Guard in Saudi Arabia. Like a lot of you, I'm not a computer scientist, but my first degree was actually in applied science. And I did a dissertation looking at the nuclear effects of nuclear weapons on audio-visual signals in fiber optics in 1981. So I am a communications officer. I am latterly a project manager. And in my third incarnation, I'm a whistleblower. And I now campaign on behalf of whistleblowers. So to set the scene, these are the major parties who were on stage, if you like, for that project. The first one is the National Guard for Saudi Arabia. Pardon me, that's my nurse in the background. I'm actually giving this from a room in a hospital where I'm actually having tests for a heart attack, which I hope I haven't had. So pardon me if you see nurses walk in behind me. They're not part of the presentation, but I couldn't find another quiet corner. The second major player is the Ministry of Defence and the Foreign Office and a number of other government departments within the UK government. The third major player is Airbus, Space and Defence. And you should be aware that Airbus as a group not only designs, manufactures and sells aircraft, but they also have a defence communications wing, because in the aerospace side, of course, they're involved in satellites. And that then leads on to the wider field of defence communications. And within the Airbus group, there was a company called GPT, Special Project Management Limited, which is a UK wholly owned subsidiary of Airbus. who were based in both UK and in Riyadh in Saudi Arabia, in order to be the prime contractor for the contract between the UK government and the Saudi Arabian government to provide all the communications, maintain them, and then dispose of them eventually for the National Guard, which is 100,000 people in the National Guard. And their job is effectively to be bodyguards to the royal family. So that sets the scene. So where was I going next? I took over the job in June 2010. So we're talking 11, almost 12 years ago now. And I got into the job and a number of different things happened over a period of about 3 or 4 months. And I don't intend to go through them in detail. I'll explain some of the terminology. But I got there and I found that I was the 3rd program director within 6 months. Now, that is highly unusual, especially when you're talking about a program which is £2 billion worth and a 10-year program. You would have thought that a company would have organized itself to have a knowledgeable and informed and competent program director to run the program right from the outset. So it was with some surprise that I found myself the 3rd program director in 6 months. And there are reasons, but all of these things, these red flags that come up, a reason was provided. And it's only in the cumulative effect of them that you actually realize that you're into something which is bigger and nastier and raises such concerns that you feel you have to do something, or you should do something. There was no program plan. When I went to see the finance director and asked for my budget because this was a new program, he said, "Oh, you haven't got a budget because this contract is not competitively let. We've been told to do it by the government. It's a single source contract." I then looked at what they'd been doing for 6 months before I got there. And they had a number of subcontracts working with different projects. But those projects were not lined up in a coordinated fashion. They weren't cohesive with the overall delivery of capability for the complete program. And they seemed to be very much focused on, I could cynically say, boxes that were made by Airbus subsidiaries and could be painted yellow and sold to Arabs for a very high price, as opposed to delivering real capability to achieve the overall requirements of the program. There was no visibility of parallel programs and their finances. There was no contact allowed outside of the company. And there was a very uncomfortable relationship with the British military team who were actually positioned in Riyadh with the duty of governing and assuring the contract. And then I came across a very funny term, a term called bought-in services. And bought-in services appeared in a number of documents, some of which I'll show you in a moment. And when I asked questions about what it was, the answers that I got were very evasive indeed. And nobody quite wanted to explain that bought-in services, in their terminology, were like outsourcing, things that we didn't have in the company, and they would buy in, like cleaning contracts or cars or auditing services, or perhaps marketing. And then I found a couple of hidden subcontractors that I wasn't told about. And I found covert payments to the Cayman Islands. And I draw a line here between suspicion and knowledge. You can have as many suspicions as you like, but when you actually have real knowledge about something, you then are faced with a question as to what you're actually going to do about it. So let's have a look at knowledge. Where does it come from? Knowledge itself is made up of just bits of data, bits of information, which we collate together, we form, we process. And out of that, when something goes wrong, you are asked, did you know about it? Were you aware, or were you ignorant? Now, at times, it's actually okay to be ignorant. You can be ignorant about something. It's acceptable If your ignorance is due to something because you weren't there, it was before your time, or you were deceived about what was going on. It's unacceptable if you know that you're ignorant about it and have done nothing about it, or if you are incompetent or you're negligent. That is unacceptable ignorance. Equally, though, just moving on, if you're aware that something is wrong, then you're faced with a decision. If you do something about it, you are justified. If you do not do something about it, knowing that it is wrong or suspecting that it is wrong, then you are either complicit, and you become more complicit the longer you leave it going, or you are willfully blind. You are deliberately turning your head and closing your eyes to what's going on. That's wrong. Let me give you an example. One of the projects, and there were 12 major projects within this program, one of the projects was to deliver a series of divisional level headquarters, which are made up of modules, which are air conditioned, fully electrified, fully digital, and connected via radio and tropospheric scatter and satellite to any of the other headquarters, fully capable for the king or the crown prince to walk into and command the National Guard brigades from anywhere in Saudi Arabia. The project had 3 stages here. We had a small version, a wider version, which we would multiply, and a big headquarters. And the overall project was worth about £150 million. So the first tranche, this is a document that actually is a real document describing the first tranche that we were going to buy. And I just point out to you this area that I've ringed in red, which is called bought-in services, because when this document came across my desk for my signature, and over here, this is where my signature should have been. This document came to me on about the 1st of December, 2010, and I refused to sign it. And I refused to endorse that document because nobody could tell me why I was paying £1.5 million, or if you like, almost €2 million to a subcontractor that I didn't know about. And that raises real concerns. It raises a personal ethical dilemma. And you're faced with the choice. Do you ignore it and sign off the dirty money? Do you do a deal? Or do you compromise and keep quiet? Or do you just bow your head, resign, and go home and find another job? And then you get into a second level. And the second level is who's in on it? Who knows what's going on, and who can you trust? And who can you talk to, and what are you going to do about it? And how do I get out alive? Because if we look at how the money flowed from the Ministry of Finance in Saudi into the British military team, into us, the prime contractor, and then out through subcontractors and to the hidden subcontractors. And my problem is that the beneficiaries of that money, as we now discover, and I suspected at the time, were the Saudi royal family, because our human resources director was a Saudi princess, and she was the cousin of the commander of the National Guard. And therefore, if I am going to stop and speak up about corruption at this level, which across a £2 billion contract, at 16% of the contract is worth £320 million, they're not going to take it kindly. And in fact, what happened was that I declared my concerns to the British Brigadier, thinking that they would take it seriously, thinking that they would stop the contract and do something about the executive directors of the company. But they didn't. They said, okay, well, you've got suspicions, but you need evidence. So I went and got the evidence, and I now gave it to them. And they referred back to London, and London told them to give it back to the company. And what then happened was the company, the managing director got me in with the human resources director and threatened me with arrest and jail in Riyadh. And it was when the princess actually picked up her mobile phone and left the room that I suddenly realized that I was trapped. I was in a secure building on the 22nd floor. And if she actually rang the police and said, come and get him, in Saudi Arabia, when a member of the royal family rings the police and tells them to arrest somebody, they arrest somebody, they don't ask questions. The likelihood is that I would either have ended up in the desert on a one-way trip, or I would have been put in jail for some strange reason and not let out for a number of years till they'd cleared up everything. So I gave my information to on a confidential manner to a trusted colleague who I'd known for 20 years. I'd known this brigadier for 20 years. I wasn't just an anonymous man coming to him. And I was betrayed. And I fled the country that night. To give them some praise, when they realized the danger that they'd put me in, they did actually help me get out that night. Having removed all the alcohol from my flat, there was a point in time where if they'd caught me and they'd found alcohol in my flat, they'd have jailed me for having alcohol. That would have been the excuse. And they waved me goodbye as I went through passport control and said, good luck. We can't do anything for you, but if you're arrested, we know where you are and we will then diplomatically try to get you out. And I came back to UK and I made a proper report to the Ministry of Defence and the Serious Fraud Office and to the compliance department of Airbus in Paris, who were very nice, gave me a lovely cup of tea and half an hour and then said goodbye. And as we'll later show, we'll find out why. This is a busy slide, I know it is, but it describes the 12-year journey that we have taken. It's not quite 12 years. The bits in red are the important bits. I blew the whistle in 2010. It took 2 years for the Serious Fraud Office to investigate formally, because Airbus tried to get PricewaterhouseCoopers, one of the big four audit houses, to give them clearance and say that nothing had been done. There was an investigation between the Serious Fraud Office, the Department of Justice in America, and the French PNF, Parquet National Financier, with whom Airbus did a deal. They did a deal in 2016. They declared significant breaches in compliance because what had happened was that my initial whistleblowing triggered a complete investigation into what Airbus were doing. And this ended up in a defense deferred prosecution agreement in 2016. And lately this month, in fact, last month, there was a prosecution in London of the company that I blew the whistle on. And after 10 years, they pleaded guilty and they were fined 30 million. So the overall effect was that the company is being dissolved. The group have paid not just 3.6 billion, but 3.63 billion in fines. The whole of the board of Airbus Group has changed. The whole of the compliance department was completely taken apart and is being rebuilt. And the effect on Airbus's reputation has been appalling. You know, their standing as a company of honest dealing has been shown to be utterly false. We're not finished yet. We have one more trial to go, which is the prosecution of the directors. But given what was stated in the last prosecution of the company, I'm presuming that that will go through fairly smoothly. I don't know. Let me turn now to the personal and professional implications of being a whistleblower. What it means to be a whistleblower. What happens? You go into this expecting that you are being honest, you're being upright, you're talking to a company, an organization, who have engaged you on the basis of mutual honesty and fair dealing. And you expect their response to be appropriate. And you find it isn't. You find that you are not liked, you're not appreciated. The truth that you're telling is not wanted because it's uncomfortable, because it's awkward, because it displays that their processes are wrong. So do not expect to be greeted well if you're going to be a whistleblower. I want to draw an analogy, and that is with rock climbing. If any of you have climbed, mountaineered, then there is a rule in rock climbing called 3 points of contact. You have 4 points of contact. You have 2 hands, and down here you have 2 feet. And when you climb, the rule is that you take one off and you move it, and you then put it back on before you take off a different one. And that's called 3 points of contact. And if you do that, you're stable. When you take off more than 1 point of contact, you are inherently unstable. If you take off 3, which some free climbers do, and it's a horrible picture, you're unstable. But if you take off 4, you're a parachutist. You're going to hit the ground. In life, there are 4 points of contact as well. There is your home, there is your health, there is your work, and there is your wealth. And when you become a whistleblower, you start taking off all of those points of contact. The first thing that goes is your work. And with that goes your wealth, because your remuneration disappears, your expenses grow because you have legal fees, your health goes down because of the immense stress you're under. And the only thing that really holds you together is the support network you have of your colleagues and their belief in you. And if you're lucky, you have a fabulous wife who stands by you for 10 years. So let's look at what happens. These are the disincentives that you will face if you become a whistleblower. This is what will really happen. You will lose your job, and with that, there is a personal disgrace that comes with that. There's a loss in self-esteem. What do your colleagues think of you? What do other companies think of you? How do you get another job? People are very adverse to taking on a whistleblower who has spoken up once, because you may come across something in their company and they may not know about it, or they may not want to change it, but you're probably going to speak up about it. You're going to lose your immediate income. You're probably going to lose your savings, and you're going to have a dead period, a black period between jobs where you do not earn anything. The other impact is going to be on your health. You're going to suffer anxiety and depression. You're going to have raised blood pressure. You're going to have sleeplessness. And there are other effects that you don't want to go into, but they're not nice. You're also going to come under a lot of stress in your marriage and in your relationships, not just your personal relationships, but actually your wider relationships with your colleagues. So what do whistleblowers actually want? Actually, what they want is a return to the status quo. They want the world to go back to normal. They want to know that they did the right thing and spoke up about something that was wrong and did so properly. They want to know actually that they are appreciated for their honesty and what they do. And they want to just go back to doing the job they were doing before. They want to actually do it better. They want other people to do it better around them. And they want their home life to be settled. And they want their health to be fine. And a thank you would be nice. Whether you get that is a different matter. But they would like to know that their action and their sacrifice was actually worthwhile doing. So let me take it going forwards. How do we make things better in future for those who follow us? Well, I think what's needed is better protection for whistleblowers. I've described what does happen. And there are laws being formulated. There's a new EU directive on whistleblowers, which actually is going to take things forward rather well. Unfortunately, when the UK left Europe under Brexit, we are no longer going to implement the EU directive on whistleblowing. So in my country, we have to set apart reforming the law in a wholly different way. We should also compensate people for the detriment, the suffering they go through in actually blowing the whistle, losing the job and not being able to get another job. And we should actually show our appreciation. So how do we do that? And this comes from my experience of 10 years. To do it, you have to change the culture. You have to change the culture in the organization. You have to change the culture across the business sector. And you have to change the culture in your country, or in my country. And secondly, you have to change what's happening in government, because you have to change the law. And the only way to change the law is to speak to the government and speak to the policymakers who support them and formulate the policies, work out all the angles, and allow proper law and proper reform to be formulated. To do that, policymakers listen to experts. You only have to listen to what's happening in COVID to know that politicians stand with experts left and right to base their judgments and their policies on science. So even in the social world, there is social science. So I have the experience. I've been a practitioner. I've been through the whistleblowing process. But to actually make the government listen to me, I have to go and study. I have to become one of the experts. And to do that, I have to do a master's. I did a master's in applied rights about 3 years ago. And I'm currently in my third year of a PhD analyzing whistleblowing. And in doing that, I can now go back to government and I can talk to them and I can influence the policymakers and influence the politicians from a point of expertise. It's hard to knock down the arguments when you've got others who have investigated it for 20 or 30 years. So my current PhD is actually entitled A Political Socialization of Whistleblowing, but it's actually a case study of the actual case where I was the whistleblower. And what I'm doing is that I'm researching why public officials, when confronted with ethical challenges such as corruption, do not speak up. But actually, it's a more general question. It asks society at large, why do people not speak up when they could do so? And it's been fascinating. Here's a sample of some of the answers that I've heard. They're varied. There is not one answer. This is a very complex problem. It sounds very easy, but it's not. People come to you with a number of, they call them reasons, but they're not. Because when you talk to someone who didn't act when they should have done, they feel guilty. They feel a loss of self-esteem. They almost apologize for you acting where they didn't act. They stood as bystanders when they watched an injured body in front of them, and they did nothing. And so the answers they give you are very heavily cloaked in excuses. So why do people not speak up when they could do so? Well, my findings are empirical, and I make this quite clearly. I engaged in what's called insider research, where I am the insider looking out at others around me to say, well, why didn't you act the same way that I did? Now that gives you great access to a particular problem that is very difficult to get inside of. If I said to you, how would you begin to research this if you're not inside it? You will find it extremely difficult. It's ethnographic because the people I'm talking to are public servants or the military or within a particular sector of business. It's qualitative because to do this, you actually have to get inside the person. You have to talk to them one-to-one, and you have to interpret what they're saying. It's also longitudinal because it's a very narrow case study as opposed to a broad survey. So I know those are limitations, but that actually gives a certain richness to the data that I've come across. I find it's not a binary product. It's not a shall I speak or shall I not speak. There are a lot of nuances and it's very complex. And a lot of the reasons that come forward are multiple. They interconnect. They're not just single reasons. It's also multidisciplinary because whilst I'm doing a politics PhD, there are elements of philosophy, there are elements of economics, there's organizational management, there's leadership, there's social sciences. It's been absolutely fascinating. So let me show you what I found and how I've organized the data to make sense of it. If you use a program called NVivo, which as computer scientists, I hope you know about, and if you don't, then please go and have a look at it, to actually code the information to create what they call nodes, and these are centers of attention. Out of that, I've developed a number of different themes, and from there, whittled it down through analysis again into what I call realms of influence. And what I'm trying to get to are the root causes. What really is the truth beneath the truth that stops people speaking up? There's a man called Karo Ishikawa. Karo Ishikawa is very famous in the manufacturing world for what's called total quality management. And he developed a process of interrelating cause and effect by putting data into a structure known as a fishbone diagram to actually get down to the causal effects, the root effects. So at level one, these are the answers to the questions of why do people not speak up in this case study. I then segregated them down into these major areas of external factors, organizational factors, and then internal factors. And I will briefly go through those. The root causes, the main root causes are fear and ineffectiveness. People are scared. And if I asked you, you could go and ask any number of people. If you do, test this out for yourself this evening. Go and say to people, if you found something difficult in your organization and you were going to decide whether to speak up or not, why wouldn't you? The first reason is fear. People fear losing everything that I've talked about. The second reason is that it'll make no difference. What would be the point of me speaking up? I can't change anything. I'm too small. It's too big an organization. I'm not going to have an effect. And therefore, like a minefield, why would I tread in a minefield if I'm only going to lose my legs? I'm not going to get to the other side. The second major reason is that they choose not to speak up because it's too dangerous, but they choose to do something else. They pick another path. It's called guerrilla government. You know, they sit on the folder, they stop the invoice, they pour sugar into the petrol tank, they glue it all up, and that is their act of resistance. It's an active act. It's not whistleblowing, but it is an active act of resistance. The third major area is that they actually believe that what they're doing is right. And for, you know, the greater good of the greater number, they're willing to get their hands dirty. Jean-Paul Sartre calls it les malsains, the dirty hands. And people actually believe it. I've come across it, especially the politicians, especially senior civil servants, actually acting on behalf of the government are willing to do wrong in order for the greater good. And of course, you have your criminal and complicit, those who are in it because they're taking a bribe, or those who are drawn into it bit by bit and become so complicit that they're scared that they're going to be vulnerable to legal action, prosecution, or the disdain of society. And if you put those together, the five main causes, the root causes, they create individual silence, but collectively individual silence creates organizational silence. And organizational silence, when you put organizations together, creates a culture of silence. And what then happens is that becomes a social and cultural framework in which future operations are conducted. And you'll find that you're pre-programmed. You will be going into an organization pre-programmed to actually do what that organization wants you to do. And that's a vicious circle, because you then come across the blocks, the fear and ineffectiveness, or the criminality and complicity, or the alternative action, and that creates more silence. So we need to break that block. Here's a very famous German. He said that the world is dangerous because people do not do something about bad things when they come across them. So what are we doing? I want to introduce you to an idea called parrhesia. Parrhesia was brought out by a man called Michel Foucault, who's a French philosopher of the 20th century. And what he did was pick up on a very old principle that was present in ancient Greece. And you'll find it in the play, The Bacchae, written by Euripides, where the goat herd has to go to the king and tell him of something bad, but he's scared of the king because the king traditionally will cut the ears or the head off those who bring him bad news. So he does a deal. He engages in what's called a parrhesiastic contract. And this is not a new idea. This is from 450 BC. Whistleblowers have been around for 2,500 years. It's still the same principle, an exchange of protection for truth. So what I've done is I've started an organization, a charity called the Parrhesia Institute, with the aim of taking research and knowledge in whistleblowing and creating a focus for policymakers to go to who want the real information, academic information, true information, and access to the real experts in order to change the law in future. And I want to stitch the idea of a parrhesiastic contract, which is a social contract between organizations and their members, to take this idea of parrhesia and bring it back into modern life. It applies across all sectors, and it should form part of risk and compliance procedures going forward. It's got to be led from the top. It's got to be implemented across organizations. And it's actually got to give protections and rewards when they're due, and sanctions to those who take reprisals against people who try to tell the truth. And only then will we break the cycle of culture of silence. And I'll leave you with one last thought, because here's one of my heroes. And this is a statement he made that when I was in the depths of the horror of what was happening to me, having told the truth. Courage is about overcoming fear. It's not about the absence of fear. It's about overcoming it, the things that try and stop you doing right. But you don't find that till you get there. Good luck when you do. I'd like to go back now to asking you those three questions. You know, what would you do if you were me? And how can you prepare yourself for it? And how can we as a society better protect those who are willing to speak up? And at that point in time, I'll hand back to the floor.